Good morning, everybody. Very warm welcome from myself, Steve Holiday. I'm the president of the Energy Institute. This morning's session is titled Fostering a Sustainable Energy Future Post the COVID-19 Pandemic. And as you know, this forms part of a program of activities that are leading up to the Energy Institute's Health, Safety, Environment and Sustainability Week event, which is taking place in Bahrain in November this year. Sharing knowledge and convening expertise to raise the understanding of energy, and particularly the role in tackling climate change, is fundamental to the role of the Institute in the 2020s. And ladies and gentlemen, of course, it's been an unimaginable year, a crisis in so many ways from a personal perspective, but also from an industry perspective, where the oil and gas sector has obviously been hit extraordinarily hard with plunging demand. But I regularly comment how awestruck I am by our industry, how it's risen to the challenges and the turmoil that it's been thrown at in the course of the last year. And that strength and that resilience continues to give me genuine hope for the even greater ask that we have as we now start to transform the industry fit for the future. During this hiatus of the past year, imposed on us by the pandemic, the case for targeting global net zero emissions by the middle of the 21st century has gained even greater traction from governments around the world. From China now committing to net zero by 2060, President Biden rejoining the Paris Agreement with a net zero target by 2050. I think those will be pivotal moments when we look back in the future. We now have 120 odd countries who've committed. So that's 70% of the world's economy. And when we hosted the IP Week in London a few weeks ago, it was increasingly clear that the public and investors all demanding a transformation. That's why the conference that we ran very much had a focus on how do we move out of the crisis into a long-term sustainable opportunity. And the critical debate is no longer about whether we need to tackle climate change, it's just how quickly can we get on with the job. And again, I often comment that the risk of talking about targets to 2050 and 2060 can tempt us often to put off action until later. But it's very clear, unless we get on track during the course of this decade, the 2020s, with demonstrable and rapid change, we're never going to get to net zero in time. Of course, the importance of the Middle East in the world of energy can never be understated. And that's why I'm so pleased that the Energy Institute has an active community of members. And I'm so delighted this morning to talk with His Excellency, Dr. Abul Hussein bin Ali Mirza. Dr. Mirza is the president of the Sustainable Energy Authority, having held various ministerial positions for over 20 years from 2002. And he's been working with BAPCO and the oil industry for over 35 years now. If I was to list the number of awards and recognitions he's had, we would be here almost all morning. But it includes the Bahrain Medal in 2011, and the Petroleum Economist actually voted Dr. Mirza the Minister of the Year in 2016. Today, he continues to serve on a number of government councils and committees, and during an extraordinarily busy working life has found time to author 2 books and research papers on management. As also this morning, as I start, I'd like to thank the Bahrain Petroleum Company, BAPCO, and note that the Sustainability Forum is endorsed by the Bahrain Sustainable Energy Authority. So my thanks to them. Following my discussion with Dr. Mirza, there'll be an opportunity for you all to ask some questions. You can submit those questions at any time, starting now. You don't need to wait until the Q&A session. If you get to the chat function and just select my name, and then I will get the questions up and I'll be able to put them to Dr. Mirza after he and I have had a conversation. So welcome again, everybody, and particularly a very warm welcome to His Excellency. And thank you for spending some time with us this morning.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning to all the people who have made the time to listen to us today. I would like to begin by thanking you, Steve, and the Energy Institute for inviting me to speak in this webinar. And I like also to assure you that the answers that I give are from my own personal perspective, as you have kindly highlighted, and thank you for that introduction. I've held many ministerial posts, so I'm talking from the background and experience that I have.
That's super. Thank you so much. And I mean, I've got a series of questions. I love these things online where they actually entitle these fireside chats, which is sort of an interesting description as we talk to each other through a computer screen. But perhaps I could start you, if I may, just right at the top line. How would you articulate Bahrain's objectives and goals today for promoting sustainability?
Maybe what I should start by saying, sustainability was the prime focus of the Kingdom of Bahrain's Vision 2030. Bahrain Vision 2030 was launched by His Majesty the King in October 2008. Bahrain at that time was the first country in the GCC to launch a long-term vision. And that vision, the aim of which was basically to further develop Bahrain and give it growth, also to build a better life for the Bahraini citizens. That vision also is based around three main principles, the main of which is sustainability. Then we have competitiveness and fairness. When that vision was launched, of course, by that time there was no SDGs. SDGs, as you know, were launched in September 2015 by the United Nations. But fortunately, our vision embodies many of the SDGs, which the 17 SDGs which we talk about. As a result of this vision, which also talked about diversifying away from depending solely on oil for our income and revenue, because in the Gulf states, until maybe 10, 15 years ago, more than 80% of the government revenues was from oil and gas, so fossil fuel based. That has changed in the last 10 years, and I hope I get the opportunity to explain that later. Because of this, in December 2013, I was then Minister of Energy in charge of both oil and gas and electricity and water. I raised the memo to the cabinet. In Bahrain, the cabinet ministers can raise memos to the cabinet to suggest establishment of organizations or make changes, etc. So I raised that memo to establish a dedicated separate center for sustainability. And the cabinet approved that. And then we started working on, with two main goals. The main goal, one, was to increase investment in and use of renewable in Bahrain. The second goal was to improve the energy efficiency that we have. And we made some major achievements. And then in October 2019, only about a year and a half ago, His Majesty the King decided to upgrade the center to an authority. In Bahrain, an authority is the highest ranking sort of organization. And he issued a royal decree establishing Sustainable Energy Authority. So when people see on your screen C, it means Sustainable Energy Authority. And I was then Minister of Electricity and Water, and he issued another royal decree appointing me as President of Sustainable Energy Authority, reporting direct to the cabinet. So what we did then, we recommended national targets for renewable energy and energy efficiency in Bahrain. And in January 2017, the cabinet approved the recommendation of our national targets. Our national targets are for energy efficiency to achieve 6% improvement in energy efficiency by 2025. And our targets for renewable energy is to achieve 5% of renewable energy in our energy mix by 2025. That's equal to 250 megawatt of clean energy starting from zero, because we were only using fossil fuel before. And the next target is to increase the renewable target to 10% by 2035, which is 710 megawatt of clean energy. The cabinet approved these, and the reason I submitted these to the cabinet to make them national targets rather than Sustainable Energy Authority targets, because we need commitment from the top if we want to make major changes. You have been a chief executive yourself, Steve, and you appreciate that if you want to make a major change, then there should be a commitment from the top. So in this case, there is nobody higher than His Majesty and the cabinet, and we got their approval for the national targets. However, it was a big challenge to ensure that we achieve the targets. We prepared two national action plans. One of them is called the National Energy Efficiency Action Plan, NEAP, and one of them is called National Renewable Energy Action Plan, REAP. These two national plans include the projects and policies we have to implement as the country, Kingdom of Bahrain, to achieve the national targets. In other words, they are the roadmap for achieving the national targets. And also we presented these, each one of these documents is 70 pages. NEAP is 70 pages and REAP is 70 pages. They are printed hard copies and they are on the website and they are accessible to everybody. The cabinet also approved these. However, the cabinet wanted also to ensure we have presented these action plans, how we are going to make sure you implement them. I mean, we just don't want talk, we want action. So therefore, they established a national committee and they assigned the president of the Sustainable Energy Authority to chair the national committee. The national committee is made up of all the stakeholders. So for example, we have a representative from the Crown, from the Prime Minister's office, we have from Electricity and Water Authority, we have finance, commerce, transport, housing, economic development board, environment. And we meet once every 2 months, and I chair the session to make sure we take each policy and project in the national documents to make sure we are implementing them. Because of this structured way of doing things, fortunately, we have achieved a lot. And I don't know how much time you will allow me, but later, perhaps I can explain. I mean, out of the national targets that we have, in a short period of time, we have achieved more than 70% of both national targets. And we have 4 more years for the other 30%. So we are sure we will achieve the national targets and maybe exceed them.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I mean, I think, as you commented, Dr. Mirza, I mean, it was great foresight to go back in 2008 and start to put a vision together, well in advance in many ways of when the world were thinking about some of these issues. So I think there's great credit in that. I guess my observation would be now, though, as in my introductory remarks, as the world is now moving so fast, of course, do you think that you'll be revisiting those targets by 2025 and perhaps actually setting even more ambitious aspirations going forward?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right, Steve. And that's because of the new position that I'm in, of course, I follow the latest updates. And I can see many targets which were set long term, they are being brought forward. I mean, you mentioned, for example, zero carbon emissions, that there are so many countries by 2050. China is by 2060. Now, knowing what happened in the last few years, I think in very few years from now, they will bring these targets forward. So therefore, for us in Bahrain, I'm sure we will go back to the cabinet to revisit these targets and make it, higher targets or reduce the time to achieve them.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it seems to me that one of the great challenges Bahrain has, and the Middle East more generally, is other parts of the developed world are talking about net zero and the introduction of new technologies as being an economic opportunity. So rather than a problem, the politicians understandably are trying to turn this into, this is great opportunity. And of course, using the back of the pandemic as well, and this is very true where I'm sitting in the UK right now, a lot of rhetoric around what people term a green recovery. So lots of new money going into the green recovery and kick-starting the economy. It's rather more difficult to oversimplify things in your part of the world in that way. So what do you see the role of sustainability as the Middle East thinks about coming out of the year that we've all just experienced?
Well, in management, as you know, you have to have a focus on the issues to make them happen. And to be able to have a focus, you have to have an entity which owns that focus and makes sure it happens. So the Sustainable Energy Authority, which is magically established by royal decree, the aim of which is to achieve these targets and to make Bahrain go through the energy transition and make use of the new technology which is now available in this area, because we follow this quite closely. We have now 2 factory assembly making panels in Bahrain and so on. So therefore, the SEA has a pivotal role. Now, I will maybe divert here just to say, let's take the GCC. Gulf Cooperation Council. For those who don't know, they are 6. It's Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, and Oman. These 6 GCC countries have 34% of the world crude reserves. So they were fossil fuel countries. And that's why in the past, maybe 15 years ago, they wouldn't think of renewable. Right? So therefore, but what happened as the world moved on and the political pressures came and the NGO pressure on clean environment and protecting the environment, etc., all these countries now have national targets. Now, these national targets were not there before. And I remember when I became Minister of Oil many years ago, I went to the first GCC ministers meeting. And I had on my agenda, because I was a new minister then, I said I wanted to try renewable energy. And all of them objected, the other ministers. They said, you're creating competition for us. We are in the business of selling fossil fuel. So why you want to bring something else? They said fossil fuel is for the countries who do not have fossil fuel in abundance. And there is a saying, of course, which here, that the Stone Age did not finish because we ran out of stones, but because new technology comes, it is cheaper, it is better for the health of society, and it's better for the country.
Yeah, which goes right back again, I think, to the foresight of setting the journey right back in 2008. I mean, I know you've authored a number of books, Your Excellency, but I mean, I'm always reminded strategically by people who say, you know, if I don't break my own business, then someone will break it from the outside. So it's far better for me to reinvent something internally.
Correct.
So it's a credit to Bahrain that they're actually getting on with that to a certain extent. But did you, I mean, Bahrain is leading, has been leading in a GCC sense. I mean, what do you think is going to be the main focus area for sustainability over the course of the next 10 years? I mean, is this about lots of solar? Is that the major focus? What do you see the focus in the region more generally?
I think diversification of the energy resource will be the focus in the future. Like I said, for example, Bahrain had fossil fuel, oil and gas, and the GCC had fossil fuel, and the region has fossil fuel, Iraq, Iran. So we are, in actual fact, if you take the GCC plus Iraq and Iran in the region, they have 64% of the world crude reserves. And that's why the Strait of Hormuz becomes so essential for the economy of the world. However, I see the focus now is on energy transition and diversification and increase energy efficiency, because fuel, I mean, fossil fuel was very cheap in the past. I mean, when I say cheap, for the domestic use, because the governments, because of abundance of fossil fuel, they were subsidizing, and it cost the government lots of money. But because they had abundance of it, they didn't maybe pay attention to trying to revisit these subsidies. In the recent past, all the GCC countries have revisited their electricity tariff, their gasoline prices, their kerosene prices, their gas prices. And this is a transition which all the states are going through. The other thing which is a focus for the countries of the GCC in particular, because we have an arid area, is water security. So, for example, in the GCC, we don't have rivers, we don't have waterfalls. We are not like Europe. So therefore, water is a scarce natural resource that we have to preserve and make sure we have sustainable availability of it. So these are the areas that I can see will be focused in the future.
Thank you. I think you represented Bahrain earlier this year at the International Renewable Energy Assembly. What observations and insights did you get from that?
Well, yes, Steve. Bahrain has been one of the founder members of the International Renewable Energy Agency, and I represent the Kingdom of Bahrain in the General Assembly, and I can vote on behalf of the government of Bahrain. The reason I say this, because the General Assembly, and maybe you already know this and your audience today know this, the General Assembly of IRENA is attended by 1,700 to 2,000 delegates. And these group of delegates, each one as head of the delegates. And the head of the delegates, for example, in my case, I'm heading the Bahrain delegate, are given opportunity, maybe around 3 minutes each, to tell the world what's happening, to tell the IRENA General Assembly what is the latest that is happening in the world of renewable energy. And I mean, if you allow me, I like to summarize maybe for the audience, because the last one I attended, the General Assembly, was on 18th of January 2021. It's only about 2 months or 1.5 months ago. What I will summarize the findings from what I observed there. For example, the total number of countries who are member of IRENA are now 163. When we joined in 2009, it was only 75. And there are 21 countries waiting in line to become members. And in the total assembly with all the speakers, whether they are from the government or the international oil companies or NGOs or consultants, the key word was energy transition, a strategy of energy transition. And they showed us that by 2020, the total investment in renewables was $820 billion. And Irina forecasts that in 2 years, 22, 23, it will reach 2 trillion. So it's the rate of increase is huge. And also they said that in the renewable area, 50% of power generation installed was from solar. And green hydrogen was the next focus. As you know, we have different types of hydrogen here. Green hydrogen is from water. Then you have blue hydrogen from fossil fuel, and you have yellow hydrogen from the nuclear. So, but everybody is focusing on green hydrogen. Europe have increased their zero carbon emissions. And the bankers are now asking, because they were there as well, they are asking before they lend the money for major projects that it should protect the environment, or there should be a clause. 24 countries, you said it, Steve, have now zero carbon emissions. Not many years ago, only the Scandinavian countries had zero carbon. Who would have thought one day China and USA would have a zero carbon emission? So things are changing. The USA under the Biden regime, of course, also have established 100% clean energy target by 2035 in their electricity network. Now that's huge. It's a very ambitious target because USA is one of the major consumers of electricity. In Saudi Arabia, King Salman of Saudi Arabia and the G20 in September 2019 announced that 50% of their electricity will be from solar and wind by 2030. Now, bearing in mind that Saudi Arabia is the second largest crude reserve in the world, they have 266 billion barrels of crude reserve, which will last them for maybe 100 years or so. But they are embarking on the most ambitious renewable energy project. That gives a sense for the people who say it's only for the people who don't have it. Costa Rica is having 100%, and there are 7 countries who have 100% target of renewable. The reinsurance, the major reinsurance company, Allianz, have announced that they will not reinsure fossil-based assets by 2050. Now that has big implications for new power stations, because the power stations in Bahrain and in the GCC were mainly based on gas and fossil fuel. Now, the agreement with these companies, because they are private sector who run it, is 25 years, and the plant lasts for 40 to 50 years. So if you build today a new power plant, which is fossil-based, you will not get it reinsured by that time. Now, Allianz is the first one, and I'm projecting that in the next 5 years, you will see many other insurance companies. And Norway, which also a fossil fuel country, they produce 2,200 barrels a day of crude, and they have a large sort of reserve of gas. They want to be 100% renewable country. And Norway also have a pension fund of $1 trillion, which is one of the largest pension funds. In March 2019, they diverted that from fossil fuel to clean energy. So what's happening in the world, and the countries, as you know, are banning now gasoline and kerosene in a few years in the cars. So the whole scene is changing, and this is something which all the countries, regardless of whether they have fossil fuel or they don't have fossil fuel, they have to go with this trend.
Yeah, no, that's a really good summary. I mean, it's the I remember being asked probably two years ago now about what was going to be the tipping point that was going to really cause the magnitude of change that you just articulated. Was it going to be investor pressure? Was it going to be consumer pressure? Was it going to be politics, et cetera, et cetera? And I remember that conversation, and my view was it was going to be some leadership, actually. Interestingly, you know, what's happened in the last year, it's been all of the above. I mean, the pressure has just increased.
True.
And it's interesting during the pandemic as well, where I think some people would probably have thought the pandemic might distract attention away from this, but that's not the case. So, really, so when inside Bahrain itself, well, there's a question came in which I think is a good question. I mean, what do you think are the big investments going to be? So, you 80% of your revenue from oil and gas a decade ago. What's it going to be in 10 years' time, do you think?
Well, I think Bahrain, I don't know whether my colleague, the Minister of Oil, mentioned it in your webinar yesterday or not, but Bahrain discovered recently another large discovery of oil, which is 80 billion of shale oil, 80 billion barrels. Of course, we cannot extract all of it. Normally in the oil industry, from the oil in place, only 5 to 10% can be extracted, but it's huge. So that means we will still have fossil fuel for many years to come. But also, we know that, you know, the investment in renewable, according to the charts that were presented in IRENA recently, from 2016 onwards until today, the renewable share of new capacity is more than the share of fossil fuel. And these charts are collected internationally by IRENA and published. So it means the whole GCC will be spending more investment in renewable energy in the future.
Yeah, but when you talk to the big international oil companies, so you know, you're sort of the almost competitors to Babco and things, that they talk, you know, they're now talking about obviously reserves they've got in the ground and whether those reserves are ever actually going to be exploited. Is the government thinking about I mean, we know that fossil fuel is still going to play an important part of the energy mix out in 2050, even with the targets that we've set ourselves. But are you thinking about, you know, just how long those reserves can actually be exploited for, and at the same time, how to clean them up so they become less carbon intensive?
Yes, of course. That is what the oil industry in total working on. They are trying to make their gas and oil products more clean and more environmental friendly. For example, I'll give you an example. In Bahrain, the first refinery in the GCC, by the way, the first discovery of oil in the GCC was in Bahrain in 1932. This was discovered by SOCAL, which today is Chevron. And the first refinery was built in Bahrain in 1936. In those days, there were not these specifications for environmental protection and so on. So over the years, the refinery, we have been modernizing it. We have been spending, maybe now we are spending $4 to $5 billion to upgrade the facilities to make them less pollutant to the environment. So all the oil companies are working on that. But what is interesting is that the international oil companies want to become international energy companies in future. In other words, they are doing energy transition. Recently, I met with Eni, the Italian international oil company. They have started a a part of Renewable. BP, Shell, all these companies are going to energy transition, which means that they realize that what they are doing on fossil fuel, although they are cleaning it up, still they need clean energy. The demand and the consumption will be for clean energy more than before. The fact that China, which is one of the largest consumers, have zero carbon emission has major implications. For example, people say, why Norway is abandoning fossil fuel in its own country, what they will do with the crude and with the gas. And the same question is asked to me as President of Sustainable Energy. For example, in Bahrain, we have our own refinery, which is one of the largest refineries in the area. And we produce finished products and we sell them domestically, like gasoline, kerosene, diesel, gas. And these are subsidized. Now, if we use clean energy, we could sell these internationally and get more price for them. So we'll be making money. Gas, we can divert because gas is used as a fuel mostly. But for the petrochemical, it is a feedstock. So we could divert the gas to feedstock. So there is room for everybody in this transition. But basically, the drive will be for clean energy.
So you might pick up sort of an implication there that you're likely to remove some of the subsidies and to recycle that money and some of the revenues from oil and gas into funding renewable investments?
Correct. For example, just to give you an example of the subsidies in Bahrain, I'll be very quick on this. Electricity. Let's take electricity, which is, of course, here was based on 100%. The source of energy for it is gas, natural gas. Electricity cost per kilowatt hour in Bahrain in our currency was 29 fils per kilowatt hour. The government was selling it before the increase in the tariff, changing the subsidy. The government was selling the first chunk of consumption for a household or company or whoever from 0 to 3,000 kilowatt hour of consumption, 3 fils. The cost is 29. So there was 26 fils subsidy. That's huge. And the rich and the poor and everybody was benefiting from it, whether he's a company, whether he's a consumer, whether he's poor, he's rich, visitor, and so on. So that has changed now. And the government has changed lots of this. The reason I talk about this, because unfortunately or fortunately for me, I was Minister of Energy when we changed all these tariffs and gasoline prices and gas, prices. But it created 650 million dinar more for the government in revenue, which they could spend on sustainable projects.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's always been a political issue in every country in the world, isn't it? About the affordability of energy and people believing it's a right. And I must admit, from a personal perspective, I've lived on prices flowing through. The best example has always been where gasoline has been subsidized in some countries. You find that they always drive more consumptive cars and bigger cars, and the places that have high gasoline prices, unsurprisingly, get really on efficiency. So that's back to where you started in terms of energy efficiency being a big piece going forward. So I'll come back to. Can I? I've got some questions from the audience that I want to get to. So if I may just ask one more from myself. If you think about COP26 that we're hosting here in the UK in November, do you have a hope that what's going to come out of this year's global event?
I think in COP26, this is a personal, just from all the changes that are going on and COVID and so on, I think there will be pressure on countries to balance curbing emissions with promoting economic recovery. And basically, you know, there will be many countries which press for carbon taxation, etc. On the other hand, there will be countries who want to have the right to emit to allow growth. So you will have two types of countries or classes of participants there. But eventually, I hope that we reach somewhere where we have commitment for sustainable, equitable, and achievable targets. And it is, when I say equitable, because there are countries who have already polluted the environment in the past, and there are countries who are just developing, and there is a different point of view on who should bear the cost of, you know, achieving less than 1.5% target, which is put by COP Paris and now COP26.
There's a question that's come in from Ali. I'll get him on to ask you, which is, what type of sustainable energy or renewable energy sources are Bahrain planning to have?
We are focusing at the time
Mix of renewables
on three types: solar energy, wind energy, and waste to energy. The reason I say waste to energy, because waste is also renewable. You may clean it today, but it comes back. Now in Bahrain, we have 1.8 million tons of waste made up of four categories: industrial waste, domestic waste, agriculture waste, industrial waste, and also we have agriculture waste. Now, if we take all that, we will use the three R's, which is reduce, reuse, and recycle. Most of it, that is about 45%. The other 55% we will convert to renewable. So it is solar, wind, and waste to energy mainly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. There's a question coming here which goes back to the energy efficiency that you mentioned earlier. I think you said a 70% success against energy efficiency plans. Where has been the major focus of the energy efficiency efforts so far?
Okay, our National Energy Efficiency Action Plan has 22 initiatives or projects in it in order to achieve our 6% improvement in efficiency of energy. These type are, for example, changing the specifications of air conditioning. Before, people used to buy very cheap air conditioners because the area is hot in the summer, but it was a large consumer of electricity. So now we have changed the specification and we have banned the old air conditioning. And the new air conditioning now have labels on them, compulsory, 7-star, 6-star, according to how much they save in electricity consumption. So when the people buy them, they don't have to be technically knowledgeable. They see the stars and make a decision. We are doing that with the Ministry of Industry and Commerce for all the home appliances, fridges, dishwashers, ovens, everything else. We have a green building code, which shows that there are 10 mandatory specifications before any new permit is given for new building. Like the AC specification, the lighting has to be LED, and the insulation has to be very strict, the flooring, the ceiling, all that is embodied in the Green Building Code. We also have moving to electric cars. So we have now, for the first time in the GCC, we have a specification for electric cars, and Bahrain has last maybe 2 weeks announced their own electric cars specifications. And we are really working now, SEA, Sustainable Energy, with the Ministry of Industry to prepare a national strategy for electric cars. All the street lights are being changed to LED. We have 70,000 street poles, 400,000 bulbs on these lights. All of it is converted to LED, and they will be next is to go to solar. No government headquarter is allowed without LED lighting in it. So nobody can have in the ministry, everybody has to use LED. We have a green procurement code, which means all the purchases in the future have to be friendly environment. We are preparing regulations for district cooling. In other words, to reduce the cost of electricity. We are working on water conservation. We are working on, upgrading our power stations to better turbines, which are more efficient in gas usage. And we are changing the tariff and the cost, the domestic cost of the subsidized products. All that makes, if we have calculated for each one of these in SEA how much saving physically in electricity and power we make, and how much is the dollar value. And the conservative estimate is that we will save the government $600 million net after cost by 2025. And we think we have achieved 70%. How can we tell also whether this is successful or not? We measure how much is the peak load, actual peak load of electricity total in Bahrain. For example, in 2017, the peak load was 3,527 megawatts. We have a capacity of 4,000 megawatts. So at that time, we had not implemented the National Energy Efficiency Action Plan. So we added 6% because of increase in population and new buildings for 2018. And we said it will be 3,786, but actually it turned out 3,437. So it's less than forecast and less than actual of 2017. So we said maybe 2018 is an odd year. Let's wait for 2019. It's also less. So that means in 2 years, despite the increase in population, all the new towns being built for the people and the new resorts and the buildings, the electricity total is coming down. Before, it was going up by between 6 to 10% each year.
Right. Okay. Thanks. There was a question came in earlier from Abdullah bin Sinad, which actually I think you pretty much answered interestingly, because he was asking about whether there should be more stringent energy conservation policies in place, and particularly talking about construction. I mean, that's a question that lots of countries are asking right now in terms of building standards. I know, certainly in parts of Europe, we've missed some opportunities by not using best technology almost a decade ago. So are you confident now that all the standards that have been put in place for all new buildings in Bahrain are the best they can be in terms of energy efficiency?
I would say it's the best, but we are getting there, and it's getting much better. And for example, we will be doing labeling for the buildings according to the saving in energy and water. We will rank the building gold, silver, etc. in Bahrain. And that shows how much saving in energy that building will make. And basically to raise the value of that building and also save electricity and power. And all this work which we are doing is beginning to bear fruit now, because it's a new thing, and new things people normally hesitate to accept or think that they become reality, but it's beginning to have an effect now.
Thank you. There's a question from Haina Michelle, which is going back to some of the comments you made earlier, which is, do you believe it's possible for Bahrain to function wholly on renewable energy one day without any input at all from fossil fuels?
Well, we don't plan on that because we have, see, now the 4,000 megawatt that we have of electricity is based on gas. And there is an agreement between, we have 5 power stations in Bahrain. 3 of them are run by the private sector. And the agreement with the private sector is for 20-25 years. So we are committed to using those, the electricity generated from these companies. So that's why we are saying we will have a mixture in future. We don't want to go 100% at this stage, because we still have fossil fuel, and the fossil fuel, we are lucky to have it. So it is, we just do sources of energy diversification and trying to reduce the impact on the environment.
Thank you. Question from Mark Scanlon. Be interested to hear from His Excellency whether the Kingdom is considering energy storage in its mix, such as battery storage, and you mentioned hydrogen earlier. So if you could comment on storage and hydrogen a bit more, that would be useful, Your Excellency.
Well, hydrogen, of course, is the focus now in most of the countries, and it is a good source for storage. And the question is very valid. The batteries are also, there is large development. Every day you hear some new sort of development in energy capacity or battery capacity and duration of the batteries and so on. So I think storage is the main issue for the future, is one of the main issues for the future.
And the role, I mean, actually during the course of the pandemic, the Energy Institute has hosted, unsurprisingly, a number of webinars on hydrogen. It's, you know, it's become very much a big conversation globally this year. And I've certainly been in dialogue with some people who are even thinking about global hydrogen supply chains, and of course the production of ammonia possibly in the Middle East and transporting it as ammonia to hydrogen into Europe and elsewhere. Is that something that you're beginning to think about from a government perspective?
Well, to be honest, we are just starting the use of, or trying to find out the advantages of green hydrogen. We will be doing pilot projects to start with, to find what is the best use of green hydrogen for a country like Bahrain, because it depends on the country and the natural resources they have, the size of the country, etc. So for us, we want to find out. We are doing, we will be working on pilot projects.
Okay, thank you. You've got a PhD. How has that helped you navigate the journey for the country?
You mean my PhD in management of change?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Well, I think my PhD, if I may, in management of change has helped me tremendously, because in the last 20 years that I have been minister, I have every 2 years I'm in one new post. For example, I was Minister of State, Chairman of Tender Board, and brought major change there. Transparency, opening bids in the public, etc., for all the government tenders, bringing credibility to the public tender process. Then I moved to the Cabinet Affairs as Minister of Cabinet, and I brought my management of change experience there by organizing the agenda and making sure the Prime Minister time is focused. So I prepared the agenda, discuss it with the Prime Minister, and I will introduce the subject rather than the minister concerned. I summarize the memo, and then it's up to His Highness the Prime Minister to direct the minister to add. So because of that, I prepared the guidelines for the minister's behavior, code of ethics, etc. Then I became Minister of Oil and Gas it was ministry. I changed it to authority. It's called National Oil and Gas Authority. The reason I changed it to authority is because it's run by a board, and I wanted to think like a business rather than bureaucratic government entity. Then I became Minister of Energy, in charge of electricity and water and oil and gas. And here in Bahrain in the summer, there was lots of electricity cuts because of the peak demands and the heat temperature. We changed all that. You hardly have any cuts now, and we improved the quality of the service. Now, I wouldn't have been able to do this if I didn't have some background in change management, because I'm sure you know, Steve, from your own practical experience, the most difficult thing is to introduce change. And I like to say here an example which I learned, of course, in bringing about management change, that you have to create a sense of urgency. Otherwise, nobody will pay attention to you. So, for example, let's take COVID. COVID brought a sense of urgency for vaccines. So instead of producing and approving a vaccine in 4 years, it's in 1 year. Now, it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for COVID. And the same thing, you know, like always they say, necessity is the mother of invention. So you come with new ideas, and if you want to make major change, there has to be a sense of urgency, there has to be commitment from the top, and the person who leads this has to have the patience and persistence and tolerance.
I completely concur with those comments. Just as we close, can you make a couple of comments about the regional cooperation and collaboration in this area? To, you know, where we started in terms of the leadership role that Bahrain sense. Do you now sense that in the region there is a commonality here, and you see further cooperation going forwards?
Certainly, the GCC countries, Gulf Cooperation Council, they meet each year. Each year, the presidency is allocated to one country. And during that year, the meeting, all the ministers, for example, Minister of Energies meet together once a year to exchange ideas and see what can they work on jointly. For example, when I was Minister of Electricity and Water, we implemented the electricity network. The 6 countries are connected electricity-wise. So therefore, if there is emergency in one country for electricity, it's automatically fed through the grid. So they don't have to keep spares in case of emergencies, to save everybody lots of money and reduce electricity cuts. We then worked on a water network strategy, and it was approved at the GCC summit, and it's being followed now. In future, I hope we can do a network for renewable energy, because we have the infrastructure in place. And for example, for solar energy, you need large area of land. Bahrain is not endowed with large area of land, but Saudi Arabia, UAE, all these countries have large areas of land. So if we make a network and use jointly, everybody benefits. Now, the electricity network, by the way, our next step in that is to make it trade. It was for emergency before. Now it is for trade. And the next step is to connect it with the Arab network and then with Europe. Why Europe? Because Europe needs electricity in the winter. We don't need it in the winter. We need it in the summer. Europe normally doesn't need that much in the summer. So we could exchange and both of us could benefit. So the regional cooperation has benefit for everybody. It's a win-win situation.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example. Thank you very much. I do recall, it must be 20 years ago now, people talking about solar in North Africa coming into Europe, which I'm still convinced one day will happen. Actually, you know, it'll sort of come into the bottom end of Europe and push energy up through Europe. Your Excellency, thank you so much for spending the time this morning. We've covered an awful lot of ground. I think it's quite hard to summarise almost. I mean, I think your insights are amazing, which are fueled because of your vast array of experience across the whole energy sector. But I think it's very clear to anyone who's listening that Bahrain has been a leader in sustainability with an ambition to continue to do so. That this challenge of the transition and how you move an economy that's so much of its wealth comes from the oil and gas sector, whilst at the same time shifting away from oil and gas, is obviously a challenge that you're completely on top of and thinking about all the time. I remarked earlier that I think a lot of the oil and gas industry on a global basis has a role still to explain to the world gas. It's still going to be energy mixing, even in a net zero world. The challenge is how to make sure that we can have it in a net zero world. Your driving on energy efficiency is extraordinarily impressive, and again, that always seems, I think, from the Energy Institute's perspective and all of our members, often the less glamorous part of the energy sector, in a sense, and yet every country realizes it's got so much opportunity there to consume so much less in the future. So I think it's fantastic that you led on that front as well. And I guess your comments on urgency and a sense of urgency resonate with me enormously as we start to think about the next 10 years and how we start to shift. And I think you'll start to see, as you remarked, targets being ever put up and more aggressive to a certain extent. And that's about leadership and creating the case for change. And I'm certainly hoping that out of the COP conference at the back end of this year, and we'll see another creation of some brave targets and lots of leadership, which I'm sure you'll be a big part of. So thank you so much for all of those comments this morning.
Thank you
to everyone who's been contributing with the questions here. And I have the great honour, as we end this session, to present you with an honorary fellowship of the Energy Institute. The fellowship is the highest category of membership that we have. It's only by invitation. The Energy Institute's got 20,000 members around the world. Only just over 60 of those are honorary fellows, so it's a pretty small club. But I have to say, Your Excellency, that I can't think of anybody who this. It's about this to an individual who's been judged, have the great privilege of chairing to further the objects of the Institute. And today, that's all about leadership. It's all about the importance and the urgency on all the subjects that we've been talking about this morning, and then looking back, on your just incredible career in the energy sector over such a long period of time, from a business perspective and of course from a government perspective. I'm sure the audience would all be putting their hands up if I could see them all and actually saying we completely agree. There isn't anybody who is a more worthy recipient of this. So thank you so much for your time this morning. I think Rami is there. Is he there in the background? Because I can't hear him.
May I, Steve, first of all, thank you very much and thank the Energy Institute for giving me this honor of honorary fellowship. Energy Institute is a very prestigious institute, and I'm deeply honored to receive this honorary fellowship. I assure you that I will promote the concepts and principles of Energy Institute wherever I'm assigned. I don't know how many more assignments I have, but whatever I do, I will put the Energy Institute at my forefront. So thank you very much for giving me this. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. I think, Rami, yes. You got the... You're super. Yeah. So you are my stand-in for the morning.
Honored.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Mirza. It's been a super for me to have a conversation with you. Greatly privileged. You hugely deserve that award. And I know that you're presenting the keynote address at the Sustainability Conference later on. Everyone this morning who's on this is looking forward to enormously. But I think you'll be around, if I may say so, sir, for a long time to come. Your energy level, your intellect, your drive, your imagination is as good as ever. So the industry and Bahrain need you to continue to play a leading role into the years in the future. But for this morning, once again, thank you ever so much for your time. We hugely appreciate it. Stay safe and look forward to seeing you sometime very soon.
Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you.